As for your question of where's it going, the statistics I cited in Europe are not good, I'm afraid. Not good at all. And one of the reasons is that for years now, everybody who has alerted anybody else to this problem has been smeared with the most vicious, the most violent, the most appalling names, the career-ending names. And that has happened to everybody, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim, white, black. It's happened to everybody. It's been exceptionally unhelpful, but utterly understandable that politicians throughout the West have responded to the upsurge in Islamist violence and intimidation by saying that their behavior has nothing to do with Islam. It's absolutely understandable. We know what they're trying to say. They're trying to say that the terrorists and the extremists speak for a minority, and what's more, you mustn't blame all Muslims, you mustn't take this out on your Muslim neighbor, and so on. It's a very laudable and understandable political stance, as it were, to take. But the difficulty is, of course, that we all know that it's also wrong. And a mistake to say for other reasons. For years, we've had this. David Cameron, when he was Prime Minister, slowly sort of evolved his rhetoric on this. But my favorite ever, I think, was US President Barack Obama, when he said after one of there was a set of, obviously everyone remembers ISIS beheadings in Syria, and after every one, David Cameron or Obama, or whoever it was, whose citizen had just been beheaded, would come out on the steps and say this had nothing to do with Islam. And then I think the last of the US hostages who was beheaded, Barack Obama said at one point, it not only had nothing to do with Islam, it had less to do with Islam than any other religion. Which is, if a guy cuts someone's head off while shouting Allah is greatest, I don't think the Buddhists should bear anything for that. But everybody is at that. And there's another strange movement you can see during the same period, which is the thing of absolutely everybody becoming an expert on Islam and absolutely everybody becoming an expert on the Quran and Hadith. And you hear this all the time now. Only 3 years ago at the Conservative Party conference, the then Home Secretary, now Prime Minister Theresa May, in her conference speech, starts quoting her favourite bits of the Quran. It was weird. I mean, it was like... George Bush did that famously after 2001. He went to the local Islamic center in Washington and said, as the Quran says, although I find it better in this translation, as if he'd spent the previous evening, I prefer, doesn't quite get the Demotic Arabic, but it'll do. And Theresa May does it, everybody does it. Again, I mean, we sort of know why, but it might just be unhelpful. It's certainly unhelpful when our new Prime Minister commissions an inquiry into the practice of Sharia law in the UK and appoints the inquiry. And who does she put on the inquiry but some imams? What do you think their conclusions are going to be about Sharia law in the UK, roughly speaking? Starting from a point of deep criticism, or... Now, you see, these are very, very deep waters, and I don't envy the politicians on it. It's very easy to mock them, but it's obviously not going to be easy. I warn, and have done for a long time, though, about some of the euphemism which has been going on, because I think that no good can come from it, and I'll explain why. During the period that politicians have all tried to keep up this facade that the Islamic blasphemy police have nothing to do with Islam, the jihadists have nothing to do with Islam, Islam has nothing to do with Islam. During the same period, the publics of the West have come to totally different conclusions. And let me give you just 3 polls from 3 countries from 3 years ago. So these are polls carried out in Europe in 2013, okay, before Charlie Hebdo, before last November in Paris, before the Brussels attacks, and before the Cologne attacks in New Year, and so on. So in 2013, 7% of the German public said that they associated Islam with openness, tolerance, or respect for human rights. 7% of the Germans said that. Turn it the other way around. In France, in 2013, 67% of the French public said that they thought that Islam itself, the religion, not Islamism, Islam, is incompatible with the French state. 67%. The same poll showed that 73% of the French public viewed Islam very negatively. It's the same story across every European country. In the Netherlands, the same year. 68% of the Dutch people said that they thought there was, quote, enough Islam in Holland. Now, I would submit that, and there are polls from the last few years, but I would submit to you that in the last 3 years, those concerns haven't gone down, that it's not the case that more French people in 2016 have favorable views towards the religion of Islam than they did in 2013. And so we see this huge gulf emerging, and I think it is a very troubling gulf. And it is a gulf between publics who, as it were, to use a slightly gross left-right analogy, but to use it for a second, publics who are going very, very clearly to the right on these issues because of the facts that are happening in front of them, and politicians simultaneously stampeding to the left. And that opens, and I put it no stronger than this, an extremely troubling possibility in our time. It's my belief, by the way, that the problems for Islam are not insuperable, not insolvable, partly because of what both Majid and Rahil have said earlier, but that they are exceptionally difficult and that they may well be even harder than Christianity's troubles in recent centuries. One example I would give you, but I think it's a sort of useful place to start, is that if you do go through the Christian scriptures, there is a verse in the Gospel of Matthew that is usually wheeled out. But apart from that, most people would find it hard to disagree with very much said by Jesus. And when somebody says to him, how many times should I forgive my brother? He, says 7 times, no, 70 times 7. In other words, forgive endlessly. A pretty good message, whatever your views on the rest of what his followers did. But I would just put it like this. Would the history of Christianity, bloody as it undoubtedly has been and still is, would it have been less bloody or more bloody if even on one occasion the founder of Christianity had, when asked what to do with your brother when he offends you, said, chop off his head? I think it would have been a lot worse. And this is a simplification of one of the problems that all Muslim reformers have. And as I say, it's not unsolvable, it's not insuperable, but it is very considerable, and it's a big mistake to pretend otherwise. Finally, I would just make these observations. In the UK, to go back to that issue of, as it were, what mainstream public opinion is, I would submit that underneath a lot of this is another concern, and it's concern that Rahil's excellent film and remarks in particular touched upon. Deep concern that people have, and I would give you one example to focus on. The Trojan Horse affair in Birmingham 2 summers ago that revealed terrible things being taught in British schools, not in Islamic seminaries, not in madrasas, but in what were meant to be secular state-run schools that had been taken over by these extreme ideologues. That story was concerning enough, but I think I'm not the only person in Britain who also noticed with great concern the fact that those revelations were objected to, pushed back against, called lies by absolutely every organized Muslim group in this country that I can think of other than the Quilliam Foundation. Everybody else tried to cover it over. Everybody else tried to say it was lies. Everybody else tried to say, well, it's all Michael Gove making it up, or so on and so forth. And this is a very, very troubling thing, because I would trust that anybody else, if we discovered that a school that in any way was associated with us was teaching hatred in assemblies and chants and songs against minorities in the morning, that we wouldn't just say, thank goodness you've caught this, but would feel a deep sense of shame that this was happening in our name. And I think that a great many people are very worried when they see these organizations that, as I say, endlessly present themselves as representing a community, pushing back against every single thing like that that comes out. It's an understandable instinct not to want, as it were, your community's dirty laundry to be aired in public. We've seen it with the Catholic Church, we've seen it with all sorts of institutions. But this is one that really is going to be a problem in the years ahead. As for your question of where's it going, the statistics I cited in Europe are not good, I'm afraid. Not good at all. And one of the reasons is that for years now, everybody who has alerted anybody else to this problem has been smeared with the most vicious, the most violent, the most appalling names, the career-ending names. And that has happened to everybody, whether they're Muslim or non-Muslim, white, black. It's happened to everybody. Black friends who've been called racists because of saying some things about extreme Islamist groups that aren't, au fait. It's been endless. And meantime, we have the serious problem of people totally lacking distinction on political sides that they feel generally opposed to. The continent now is awash with, our continent is awash with parties of the right, not all of which are far right, certainly not all of which are fascist, some of which have voiced very big concerns about Islam. Instead of identifying everybody who voices these concerns as fascists, I think a much better use of our time is to look seriously at what they believe, really analyze the thoughts, really find out if they are anti-Semites, if they're actually racists, and so on and so forth. But, very few people exercise that kind of judgment because they sort of need all of these guys to be Nazis. A lot of people do that because they kind of say, well, if I can kind of call all those guys Nazis, then some way down the line I might be allowed to criticize Hizb ut-Tahrir. It's a sort of political thing they do. Finally, very quickly, the previous round, but it answers two of the things. About the thing about political courage and also about the hijab. I've got to tell you this story. 13 years ago or so now, whenever it was, when France first banned the headscarf in public buildings, I remember doing a BBC discussion with a left-wing politician who will remain nameless, and an Iranian journalist friend of mine who is far more hardline than me on some of these questions. And the question was on this. I said, well, the French state has the right to do this. When people say, who is the French government? Well, they are the government of the Republic of France, and one can agree or disagree, but they do have that right. And anyhow, the Labour politicians spent the entire programme lambing into me and my Muslim Iranian colleague for our stance. We were called Islamophobes, everything else, the usual, what one was going to get used to in the years ahead. But I'll never forget that when we exited the studio, this person clapped me on the back and said, "Never forget, Douglas, we're all with you." And I said, well, what about the half hour live on air we just had, which was the more pertinent moment to make any such support felt? And the reply was straightforward. He said, you've got to understand, I've got a very large Muslim constituency. To which my Iranian friend said, in one of the most beautifully polite Persian things, devastating things I've ever heard, said, I see, you are a coward. Anyhow.